Hey there, it's Dr. Heidi. You're listening to It's Not Normal, It's Toxic, a podcast geared towards the things you may be misunderstanding about the difficult relationships in your life. I did not understand it when I was in it, but I definitely understand it now, and I want to share that understanding with you so that you too can find the courage you didn't know you had to make the changes you didn't think you could make. Hey, so it is Thanksgiving week, and we are back here at It's Not Normal, It's Toxic, Rid Your Life of Toxic People. This is the week that I always get to do the What I'm Thankful For podcast. And I'm sure that when you guys listen, you are like, oh, here goes Dr. Heidi again. I'm not recording that particular podcast today, so you'll have to just hang on and be patient because I know you're waiting to hear all the things I'm thankful for. Today, I actually have guests. And kind of excited about these guests because I just met them about 5 minutes ago. So anything you hear, I'm hearing for the first time. They are the hosts of their own podcast. Breaking Free from Narcissistic Abuse is the name of their podcast. And they have a team. I don't have a team, but those of you in Strength Within were introduced to the new mascot this week. I adopted a little white kitty that is about as big as my hands. She is sleeping under the table. Her name is Vindy, named after a song that I really kind of clung to after I ended up running away and was by myself for a while. Vindicated by Dashboard Confessions. I have to say that because I didn't get a hold of Dashboard Confessions before I said that on the podcast. So her name is Vindy. And so if you hear her, I'm hoping she does the infant thing, but she's sleeping under there. So I kind of have a team, but she's not going to participate much. All right. Today we have Kerry McAvoy and Tara Blair Ball with us. And they have put together a podcast that I believe is doing quite well on all the platforms. Kerry is a psychologist and a writer. She is an expert on cultivating healthy relationships, deconstructing narcissism, and understanding various other mental health related issues. She's been featured in a lot of different media. She's on TikTok, she's on Instagram and YouTube. She educates about abuse dynamics and offers advice on trauma related issues on her podcast, again, Breaking Free from Narcissistic Abuse. Tara is a certified relationship coach, author, and podcast host. She specializes in empowering individuals and their relationships to go from toxic to happy. Okay, I have to say to the listeners, you just heard me say both of these ladies try to get relationships that have the possibility of turned around. So don't go shut the podcast off, okay? There is things you need to know, whether you're in it, whether you've left, or whether you're thinking that they're the biggest blankety blank. Because I will tell you that even if you have found my podcast or found their podcast, you've always found it for one particular person because you wouldn't look for it until something gets really, really bad. And some of the things, even if that particular relationship that you found us for isn't going to become healthy or happy, you got to look around at the other relationships, because if we've attracted one, we've attracted more. So, take a little peek into your friendships and stuff like that, because there's a chance that my guests have ways to resolve some of those relationships that don't have to be thrown completely out the window. Okay, you guys, welcome. I'm sure that you can tell Dr. Heidi talks a lot. Part of that is, again, I don't have a guest, or I don't have a co-partner, so I have to keep talking. All right, I want you guys to say a little bit about yourself that wasn't in the bio.
Well, I'm a narcissistic abuse survivor myself, and I became a victim despite having 20 years of counseling experience as a psychologist. I ended up widowed and jumped into the dating world, ended up what I thought met a fantastic guy. And then shortly after the marriage, found out that he was not so fantastic, that he was actually a very toxic situation.
Mm-hmm. My story is somewhat similar to Kerry's in that it's actually not similar at all. Now that I think about it. But the feelings are the same. I relate
Yes.
to the feelings so much. I got married when I was 26 to a fellow recovering drug addict. I today have about 16 years clean later this month. And I married a fellow recovering drug addict. Thank you. Who I thought had the same goals in mind. After we had been together about 8 years, I found out that he was secretly hiding drugs above kitchen cabinets and our children's toys, things like that. And then I later found out that he had embezzled from his job. So while I was in that relationship, we had been in couples therapy, individual therapy, couples retreats, all this shit to try to make it better and make it work. And during that time is when I started my own kind of process and becoming a relationship coach and advising and working with individuals and couples on their own unhealthy relationship patterns. And when I finally left that relationship, I realized how much the narcissistic abuse aspect of that relationship, how much it impacted me so much more than the other types of abuse. And I started in 2020, building an online platform, which is where I'm at today. I work solely online today. And then Kerry and I met a few years ago. And because we were both blogging on the same platform, writing about the same kind of stuff, healing from toxic relationships. And then we connected, and later I joined her podcast, Breaking Free from Narcissistic Abuse. And that's where we are today.
I love it. I love it. You guys, I'm actually going to talk to them after this talk about my story. My listeners know that hearing the word that starts with an N on my podcast is very, very rare. So I have a little bit different take on it, but I am not a licensed mental health professional. I'm a chiropractor acupuncturist by trade. And so I chose the word toxic to go with, where you with a mental health degree would be more comfortable doing that. So that'll be interesting to talk about that. I did not inform you of some of the questions I was going to ask you today. I'm 100% sure you will be very prepared for them. One of the reasons I want to ask you this is very personal. Okay, so we might end up doing a coaching counseling session online with me. So, and one of the reasons I want to ask you about this is because I have been out of the major toxic relationship in my life for 15 years. And I have been in the best relationship of my life for almost 15 years. And I've been remarried for 11 years. Obviously we could tell my story, but we'd be here till next Tuesday and we would miss Thanksgiving. So like you guys know, I don't have to tell you that it was a Jerry Springer cross Netflix life for a while. Right. And then I moved 4 hours away. I started rebuilding my life. I started a new practice. I did all that stuff. I was exposed to a lot of new stuff with my husband. We've got a boat, we got a Harley, we had great times. About a year and a half ago, I started, and I know it was an insecurity thing because that's where it all comes from. I started having some major episodes that I had not had prior. So for me, it was completely devastating. And I was so upset that I was having them that I couldn't even get past the mad part to even deal with them for a while, because all I could think of was, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm still freaking through this crap. And so, because it was embarrassing and I couldn't explain it to people. And for a long time, I've been doing this work for about 8 years. And for a long time, I really tried to be this Dr. Heidi, because if people were going to follow me, they needed to know I knew what I was doing and I could be the leader and I was perfect and I was all the way healed. And then the last year and a half, I fell flat on my face and was kind of embarrassed to let my followers know. Well, now I've worked very hard, because I think what happened is I kept myself very distracted and never dealt with the stuff. It was, oh, now we're going to go do this. Okay, let's go to Nashville. So if I'd have a bad day, I would, sit on it and have all the yuck. And then, oh, now we're going to go do this. And just like you deny it and shove it under the rug in the relationship, I think I was doing that and just getting distracted rather than, and I was also one that thought, oh, I can fix this. I can fix this. I can fix this. I can fix this. He came into my life, ruined it. Logic speaks. If he's out of my life, it should be normal. Right. So So now, because I've been trying to be a lot more transparent, I don't want the people that work with me or the people that work with you to think that all of a sudden it's a light switch and all of a sudden we stay back to normal, but we know that's not what it's going to. And all of a sudden here you are, everything's perfect. And that's what I was thinking I was trying to achieve. And now it's very real to me that that isn't. And since you got, since Kerry, especially since you have a degree in this, I can logically understand why this happens, and I can explain it in my terms. But I want to talk about the trauma bond a little bit, and I want to talk because that's immediate, and I want you guys to give my some insight to the longstanding effects and how it really affects our future relationships. Because when it starts affecting our future relationships, the first thing we think is, oh, I did something wrong again. What's wrong with me? They're right. Nobody's ever, and we take it all on again. And it's devastating. So the first thing, I guess, is, you work with the narcissistic, the unhealthy, the, toxic relationship people. What do you see being the hardest thing? Now, making the decision to leave is hard, and actually leaving, but what do you guys see as the things that your clients struggle with after the decision to leave has happened?
The first healthy relationship. That's absolutely what I experienced, as well as what a lot of my clients experience, is how do you adjust to a new normal?
Mm-hmm.
And I had that myself personally. When I started dating my now husband, I was used to being in a relationship where someone would rage at me if something happened. And my now husband and I were on a date, and he had a flat tire. And I spent the entire time tense, waiting for him to call me a bitch, call me names, throw things, whatever. And I ended up, after the tire was changed and everything like that, he was like, "Are you okay? What's going on?" Because I was so tense and not speaking. And I just said, "I just want to thank you for not yelling at me." Mm-hmm. And that was that. And he was like, "Why would I yell at you? Like, it wasn't you didn't do anything. I wouldn't even yell at you if you were the one to make the tire flat." But I see that as being the biggest adjustment, is how to create that and adjust to a new normal in our relationships. Our normal was so messed up, and what was natural, normal, what we were used to. And then we're having to sort of readjust what it means for us.
And we're questioning, wait, is it normal?
Yeah.
Now the whole world thing comes into
right.
Right?
Is this healthy?
Kerry, what would you say is
I think
the thing that they struggle with?
Yeah, I think there's something that occurs earlier than that, and that is victims leave these relationships highly traumatized. When most of us go through a dramatic event, a crisis, and majority of us in our lifetime will experience something that's traumatic, only 40% develop traumatic symptoms, like PTSD symptoms. But they've found that narcissistic abuse survivors, 75% develop PTSD or CPST. So the rate of trauma-based symptoms among survivors is through the roof. So the first thing that most of us have to do is we have to figure out how to deal with the fact that we're on an acute alert, we're in hypervigilance, that we're overstimulated constantly, or that we're feeling extremely shut down and afraid to go out and do new things or meet new people. So there's two things that people seem to see among survivors. And one is this increased hypervigilance, but the also is hyper independence, because they've learned they can't trust anybody and they're on their own. So they do everything by themselves, or they don't know how to reach out and incorporate their social support system. Partly for also the reasons that you mentioned, which is not only have you been in a toxic relationship romantically, but chances are you have other toxic relationships in your life. So when you reached out for support, you didn't get it. So you stopped trusting anybody, or at least most people.
Yeah, and even if you had relationships that were solid, because this was kind of my experience, if they haven't experienced, they don't understand it. So when you're trying to explain it, it's very difficult. That is, one of the things, because I have been out so long and because of the work that I do. I mean, I literally was beside myself that this was happening. But, the man that I'm married to now, he really tried to learn about it. He really tried to read, really tried to keep me, get rid of the stressors, and really tried to watch his actions and his words to make sure, because I was having, the triggers were sitting right here for some reason. To the point where I didn't know what was going to trigger me. So I was not wanting to go out and stuff just because I don't want to embarrass myself or embarrass him. And I really wanted him to help me carry it. Like I really, really wanted him to. And one of the biggest things for me was I kind of was putting him in a toxic relationship. He cares about me like crazy. He would do anything he could. The male gender wants to fix it. He can't fix it, and he can't understand it because he's never been in it. So after, several months of really trying and triggering me anyway, or he really felt like he was walking on eggshells because he can't say this and he can't say that. And if he does, if he does this, she's insecure. And so he finally had to get a little stern and go, I want to help you where I can, but I don't get it and I can't fix it. So you are going to have to dig deep and figure it out, which of course made me go, oh, he wants to help. And, and you just, those things go through your head. So how do you help your clients realize that it is our responsibility? Because you know what my biggest thing was? Oh yeah, now I need help. Let's just add that to the list of the crap that's wrong with Dr. Heidi, because we've already got a list, And so then when they try to help and say, well, I think you should see a therapist, you're like, oh yeah, I'm sure I have to, because it just makes you feel like, oh, there's another thing. So how would you tell somebody? And again, I've worked very hard. That's why I'm being able to be sarcastic about it now. It was not funny 8 months ago at all. Realize that it's not something that is wrong with them, but something that happened, and tools to, okay, other people aren't going to fix it. If it's somebody in feeling like that, how would you get them to, it's a perspective shift.
Yeah, I think the first thing is psychoeducation. Learning a lot about it really helps give you perspective, because it makes it more understandable, gives you some handles. It takes it from inside of you. Is something defective about you, which the toxic person wants to emphasize. The problem isn't them, it's you. So if you're a good, compassionate, empathic person, you think, well, it must be me. I mean, relationships take two people, so what's my piece to it? So it really helps for us to step out and learn about the dynamics, which is a very unusual dynamic. It's not normal. This is what we've gone through, what we've experienced is not a typical interpersonal conflict. This is something radically different. And as a psychologist, I saw lots of couples, and in graduate school, we weren't taught this. This is something new, a new understanding that's happening in the field, is that some problems aren't created by two people coming together. Some problems are created when one person has significant issues, comes in and then disrupts the relationship and disrupts the other person as a way to augment themselves, as a way to stabilize themselves psychologically. And so learning about that, learning how that has impacted you, I think is a really important, helpful tool.
And so is that like a treatment that you take your clients through?
Well, I actually these days don't do one-on-one counseling, but I do have groups, and yes, that's a huge piece of my platform. These days I would say I'm a mental health advocate, educator, which I do mostly online. And yes, absolutely, that's the thing. That's my platform, is thinking knowledge is power. If you understand it better, then you can disown the pieces that you need to, that they say that was you, but actually wasn't you, it was them.
So the metaphor I use a lot with clients is the spiral staircase. And this was definitely the experience for me in recovering from, honestly, several of these types of relationships. But it's that idea that, ideally we're always moving up, as in we're getting more healing, we're getting more experience, more education, but we tend to deal with the same issues over and over again. And so when you mentioned earlier that you had like some episodes, like you didn't really explain what the episodes were, but I assume if I listened to your podcast, I would know all about it now.
You want me to act them out? It's no.
But I think that's so true for so many of us, that we have these, it may not be the same exact situation. It could be the same person. It could be a person that just reminds us of the other person, but we're continually having to deal with the same kind of dynamics and same issues But what always changes is our reaction to that. And our reaction is dependent on, are we self-regulating? What are we doing for ourselves? Have we gotten education? Do we know what dynamics are at play? If this person is doing Darvo, how do we respond to that? And so I see that a lot with my clients, as well as for me personally, is just my knowledge as well as how I am doing. It doesn't mean I'm ever going to be free from those particular situations. All that changes is how I react for myself. And what I see working very well for my clients, especially, and multiple studies actually recommend this as well, is just expressive writing. This was actually the first tool, and really, honestly, the easiest tool that I used. Expressive writing is where we're just focusing on feelings instead of events, which was very necessary when I was in that really unhealthy relationship and starting the process of leaving, is being able to focus on feelings instead of facts, because the facts were so muddled for me and I couldn't make sense of them at all. So, but being able to focus on, oh, I'm confused, or this made me really angry, or I felt really hurt, being able to focus on that and actually get in touch with myself when I'd spent so much of time in that relationship being checked out or disassociating, but really getting into those sort of body and feeling checks was the first step that I think is really helpful in assessing, what's really going on, because my body's not going to lie to me on a regular basis.
No, but we'll lie for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Because when you were saying, I really just want to focus on, I didn't want to do that. I'm like, I've been out for 15 years. I don't want to do that. I'm going to stick it somewhere else. So another question that I have, and it's hard. This is another thing that's very hard to explain. Like when I try to tell my husband this, my husband's so sick of talking about feelings, he could probably right? Because mine aren't the same as his. I'm very empathetic, so I'm probably much more sensitive. Not necessarily more sensitive than you two, but much more sensitive than, some. And there's things that we interpret differently after we've been through traumatic, experiences or traumatic, long-standing, emotionally abusive, psychological warfare type relationships. That is one of the things that was hard for me to wrap my head around, that may not be okay unless I work my little tushy off, which I have been doing. Can you explain how a long-standing narcissistic or long-standing emotional abusive relationship changes the way our brain interprets? It doesn't have to be scientific, because I don't have rocket scientists. All my listeners aren't rocket scientists, but maybe some of them are. But just so that people that are just trying to get answers can kind of understand.
Yeah, it actually does create brain changes. There actually is, research is now confirming that there is neurological differences in neuroimaging on narcissistic abuse survivors specifically. There's two areas that have been changed. One is the amygdala, and that's the area that's in a very base, it's near the base of your spine. It's the oldest part of the brain, meaning it's the one related to survival. And they have found that area has swelled. So it's larger, it's become larger. That makes us more hyper alert. We're more vigilant, we're suspicious, we're guarded, we're struggling with sleep. We're struggling with relaxing. We feel edgy. We're on alert a lot because we're scanning the environment for danger, because we've lived in a dangerous environment where it could be very subtle, like coercive control could be, they moved your soap, so you have to search for it just to mess your day, just to kind of fuck with you for that day. So that part of the brain's changed. And then the other part is the hippocampus, which has to do with memory. And also, it's also part of the limbic system, which is where our emotions are regulated. And that part is shrunk. So how that affects you is it affects the executive functioning. So you may find yourself feeling forgetful, you're more scattered, you're struggling to be organized, maybe you're struggling to sort of keep up and do the things that you used to do. Things feel harder. You don't feel as capable as you did before. So you get that combination of you're not sleeping, you feel really alert, suspicious, you're watching for everything, you're not sleeping really well. Of course, your cortisol levels have rise, which now means you're holding weight. you're struggling with how you, so then now you have self-esteem issues around that. And on top of it, the criticism they're attacking you with is also damaging your self-esteem. So you have all of this that's happening that's created a profound change. What I found intriguing is that people with personality disorders have a disorder. It's a disorder of the personality. These things have also been found to be hardwired neurologically, pretty fixed in these individuals. So toxic people who have personality disorders don't tend to change, if much, but yet victims, they're now finding the victims have upwards to 10 different personality characteristics that are impacted by the abuse. So victims change, whereas people with personality disorders tend to be resistant to change.
Oh, that's interesting. Let's not tell my husband I have 10 personalities.
10 changes to your personality.
Yeah. Probably
just
agree.
to mention, too.
Yeah, he's so cute. He wants to learn. He wants to know this, but I've tried to. I mean, there's only so many ways to explain it. You know, I think I've let him off the hook. I think I'm overthinking about it. But Tara, what were you going to say?
Just that level of trauma, when Kerry was talking about the executive dysfunction, your likelihood of developing ADHD or ADHD-like symptoms also is impacted. And also, if you were actually diagnosed with ADHD before you experienced the traumatic relationship, you're actually 70% more likely to then be impacted more than if you were a person who didn't have ADHD before. So it's sort of like a chicken or egg thing. Like, was it the ADHD or the trauma, or was it the trauma or the ADHD? But that executive dysfunction, I was recently diagnosed with ADHD this year, and I feel like I've had it most of my life. So I don't know if that's the case, but I definitely felt like I was, and two, it was the cognitive dissonance. I just struggled so much in that narcissistically abusive relationship, just abusive relationship, period.
Yeah. I kind of went through the same thing as you, but being the chiropractor, I'm not covering up the symptoms person, right? I'm going to figure this out. And this year I did the same thing. I started thinking of how many people in my life said, Heidi, you have a lot of energy. I thought, and so then I finally succumbed to that, and then did, a lot of research, and I was surprised to see how much those two tied together. So I know that you guys focus around the narcissistic personality and the narcissistic abusive relationship. What are some of the myths that surround it? I'm going to say one of them right now. Okay. My listeners have probably heard me say this. I've got a few reasons that I don't use that word so much. One is they don't have to fit into a diagnosis in order for the relationship to be bad for you, because otherwise people are going down and they check every box but one, and then they're like, it's not that, I guess I better stay. So I tend to stay away from that. But then the other thing is, I practiced healthcare for 25 years, and in the 90s, no offense to listeners, everybody had fibromyalgia. And then the 2000s came and everybody had a peanut allergy, and then everybody was gluten intolerant. And then this is the decade of everybody's a narcissist, because all of a sudden society has discovered that word. And so it'll calm down. I can't wait to see what the next one is. But just so that's one of the other reasons, because so many people are getting bombarded with that word that don't really understand it. You guys, I know 100% could be able to very, very easily explain that. But what are some of the myths that surround your narcissistic relationship, or your emotionally abusive relationship, or the psychologically controlling relationship that people think are true but are not?
I'll go first, I guess. So something that we address in the podcast a lot is the definition of narcissistic abuse. And I think it's always important to highlight that, because a myth that is actually not true by the definition that we're following is that narcissistic abuse can only happen when you're being abused by a narcissist. Mm-hmm. But anybody can actually be narcissistically abusive. My relationship with my ex was absolutely narcissistically abusive, but he would not qualify for a narcissistic personality disorder, but he was an active drug addict who had excessive narcissistic traits. Mm-hmm. And the definition that we follow is that it requires a facade to dupe us into something. So my ex was absolutely abusive. He was emotionally, verbally, physically abusive. But for me, What was worse was the fact that I thought he was in recovery from his drug addiction. He wouldn't take Tylenol or ibuprofen for pain, but secretly he was doing Oxy on the side. That level of deception and how much it infiltrated every aspect of it, I found drugs in my house and still had trouble believing that it was him. And he was the only other person I lived with other than my two babies. Like, who else was going to do it? But that whiplash, that scam, that dupe that Kerry and I talk a lot about that is what we have to pay attention to, because it can be anybody that is narcissistically abusive, but it has to involve the scam.
Yeah. So you just said that you found evidence in your house, but your mind could convince you that it wasn't him. You can do the flip side of that too. If you kind of notice their behavior, you can be 100% sure they're on it, and they'll say, no, there's none in the house. And you will 100% go through every room, every drawer, flip everything over. And you never really know if you're right or not, because there's been so much, up and down. But I love the way you define that, because I always say that to everybody. Everybody has toxic traits. Everybody has the ability to portray these traits. So I love that you guys look at it the same exact way that I do. And I think, society using it all the time has kind of warped that a little bit. It's not because there's some people not looking at it that way. But Kerry, what are some of the things that you think people think are true that probably aren't, or misconstrued or misunderstood?
Well, I can think of 3 right off the top of my head, and I don't know which one is more important, because they're all really important, and I think they have huge ramifications. But I think the one that there's one that drives me the nuts the most. I'll go with that one first, and that is that there's a certain type of person that becomes a victim, and usually this person, and usually she's a woman. So we completely negate all the men who are being affected by a very toxic woman in their life, or women, or families. But usually she's a woman. She's come from a troubled home. She's had trauma before, and she's had a string of bad relationships. And this is just one more bad relationship because she has bad boundaries and not a good self-esteem.
And her picture's broken.
Yeah, and she probably is a codependent on top of it. And that's why she's in this relationship. That actually was researched by Sandra L. Brown in 2014 out of Purdue University and just debunked. That's based on anecdotal material out of domestic violence shelters years ago, 40, 50, 60 years ago. That was sort of the profile of the victim that they thought walked through their door. What Sandra Brown found when she looked at 600 cases of narcissistic abuse, and found that 67% of these individuals did not qualify on any of those metrics at all. They did not come from a troubled home. They were not codependent people. They had no history of trauma. They're actually very high functioning individuals. The common denominator among all of them, in addition to the fact that they met a toxic person, was that they had 2 personality traits that made them more susceptible to being pulled into these relationships. And that was, they were highly agreeable, meaning they're people who believe in the goodness of others. They believe people can change. They're good team players. They're very cooperative. They're somebody you want to hire if you're looking for a candidate for a job. The other quality they had was conscientiousness. They're very high on that as well. That made them have strong moral compasses. And then when they started something, they tended to stick to it. They saw things out. They were very long-suffering. They tended to work harder at something, looking for the solution instead of blaming it on something else. These 2 qualities, she calls them super traits, made these individuals more vulnerable. Only 1/3 of the group actually fit the old profile. 2/3 did not. And the interesting thing was, people with these characteristics are more susceptible to chronic and persistent cognitive dissonance, which I know we're throwing that term around as if everybody knows what that is. But they're more susceptible, which means they're also more susceptible to the ramifications of the abuse. In other words, their functioning deteriorated fast, and they began to look like the stereotype by the end of the relationship. They didn't fit it in the beginning, but they look like it at the end because of the effect of the abuse on their psyche. So that's the one that I really, I feel strongly about, because I feel it's an attack on victims when we do that. Another one is that it takes 2 to tango. No, actually it doesn't. Lots of us are in relationships, and it's that we are relational creatures, and what happens in a relationship actually affects and informs our self-esteem. You think of a baby is born, the baby determines It's good based on the mother and father's feedback. And they feed this infant saying, well, we love you, you're worthy of love, you're precious, we take care of you. And the baby says, I'm really special. I'm somebody worthy of love. There is this reciprocal dynamic that happens. It continues into adulthood, yes, at a much lesser degree. But when you get into a toxic relationship that actually has cult-like programming occurring within it, that then causes the victim's self-esteem to be dramatically impacted by what's the other person's feeding this individual. So that's the second one. And the third one we kind of already mentioned is that narcissistic abuse is rare. It actually is not. If you take the stats of narcissists, sociopaths, psychopaths, who are the three biggest groups who are most likely to do this, and then think about the fact that, okay, so maybe there's only like 5 to 7% of the population in the United States that are that, if you use the government statistics. But how many relationships do they have in their life? Let's be conservative and say each one of them has a minimum of 10 people that they'll interact with. Now we know that's low because they're affecting coworkers, neighbors, children, partners, family. But 10's really low. You times that out and it comes up to 160 to 180 million individuals in the United States alone are being affected by someone who's has these traits that cause narcissistic abuse. So that's why it's so popular, is because it resonates with so many people.
Mm-hmm. I think, the word narcissism, this is good, because when I say I don't use it, my followers and my listeners think that for some reason I don't believe in it, because my clients will go, they'll call me and they'll go, well, now I know you don't believe in this. No, I didn't say I didn't believe in it. I 100% believe in it. I just don't want you to think you have to make them fit into a box, obviously. Yeah. But that term, just like when just think about when you first got married. You didn't think of the divorce process, right? Here I'm working with people that are trying to get divorced, and one of my clients, and he was a male. I do work with a lot of males, like you said, that have the toxic female in their life. And he goes, how is it that I'm 58 and I know nothing about divorce? Well, because you had no reason to do the research.
Yes.
Right. And what we're talking about is the same thing. If you have no reason to do the research, and even though this was me, I felt like something was wrong all the time, when it was made for me to believe that it was my fault, I still wouldn't be researching that, because what I'd be researching is how to be a better wife or how to fix my relationship. Because, the words that come out of their mouth to the agreeable and the overconscientious person, we just believe the words. We can believe 82 sets of words and 8,000 actions don't support them, and we still believe the 82 set of words instead. Yeah. And I love the direction that you guys come from. Why don't you tell us, and you can both do it, or one of you can do it, or you can like do a duet if you want, where people can find you. One thing, website, podcast, go ahead and let's do that. And then I have one more question for you before we get off of here.
Well, you can find our podcast at Breaking Free from Narcissistic Abuse. We're on all the platforms and things like that. Me individually, you can find me on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, all of the socials at Tara.relationshipcoach.
Okay, Tara, really quick. What do you do? Do you work with people?
I work with individuals and couples. So when you mentioned earlier that not every toxic couple can recover, absolutely. And some of the help or the work that I may work with clients is helping to give people some eyeballs on what's actually happening in their relationship to help them take steps to potentially leave.
Yeah. But I think too, with the media the way it is, there probably are salvageable relationships out there. But this is so big. One thing people are like, oh, we're done, And so I appreciate that you do that kind of work. Kelly, where can people find you? Yeah, I just called you Kelly.
Yeah, no, that's okay.
That's a chiropractor thing. I'll remember if you can't turn your neck, but I'll call you whatever name I want. You have to answer.
That's funny. That's funny. It's not the first time either. I'm Kerry McAvoy Ph.D. on all the platforms, and also our podcast is found on Breaking Free from Narc Abuse on also the mainstream social media platforms like Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook, and YouTube as well. So if you can find us that way. For me, what I do is I have a group of survivors, a community group, where I have kind of two tiers where I offer weekly group live coaching with me. for the group. And then for others who are looking for a more low cost entry, I also just have chat support, community support, direct contact with me. And I also offer various things like live group coaching periodically, or other ways for people to kind of supports, like resources and supports for people to get help. I think the biggest thing that I have that we didn't talk about is that I wrote a memoir called Love You More, which is actually written like a novel. So for those who are like, what is narcissistic abuse? And is this actually happened to me? Or, oh, I think I'm the only one who does look like Netflix crossed with Jerry Springer's. You can say, oh no, a psychologist, this happened to her too. So if you're looking for validation, they should check out Love You More, the harrowing tale of lies, sex addiction, and double cross.
So where can they get that?
Amazon.
On Amazon? Okay.
Yeah.
I did write that down when you were talking, because you had mentioned that the people that fall into these relationships, it's not a stereotypical victim of abuse, type person. And I mean, I remember denying it because I'm like, a chiropractor is a primary health physician. We're one of the few still out there. So we can treat anything. So we had to go through, not as many as you, but we had to go through the psychology. We had to go through all that. So when I'm in it, I'm thinking, well, I'm way too smart to be in one of those because I have all this, right? And I grew up with a relationship that was very healthy, or from a child's perception, it was, normal. So I kept thinking, well, I know this, Okay, good. I am super thankful that you guys came today. I have to tell you, I love the perspective that you come from. I struggle sometimes with different people's perspective. And actually, when I looked at your pictures, I already knew that I would like you. Now you guys are going, oh my gosh, she's about out of air and we need a break from Dr. Heidi right now.
Well, thank you so much.
We're going to record with you, but we're going to go get a drink really quick. That's what you guys are thinking. But again, thank you for being here. You guys can check the show notes for any links that they have mentioned. If you can't find something you need, you all know how to get a hold of me. If you think that there's somebody in your life that can relate to this episode today, oh, can you guys hear Vindy? I hear her. She's awake.
That's precious.
Share this episode, share the information. Make sure that you check out Breaking Free from Narcissistic Abuse on all the major platforms.